basically it's late at night, and yeah, definite. Had an idea. I mean, war and morality, and basically what's on the picture. It's a pictogram of designed art by rubbish, but not trash. Because trash is something that you could describe male behavior as. I did remember just the video. And rubbish is never a woman. That is also not described in the video, but it's fairly irrelevant and for this topic, because what we wanted to talk about is the morality of war. Well, morality of war is inherent to it, in my mind. It's an opinion, nonetheless. But basically, if you fight a war, you follow the moral guidelines you set for yourself, right? You follow unabidable rules. If you want to win a war, you basically follow an idea that is of totality but not total war. Meaning, as soon as you enter a war or field of war, the degrees of which you can operate are rather apparent. She means aberrant. She just didn't want to say it because she thought the war does not need moral inherent and tried to prevent me from this idea. Inherent guidelines. Now, Sun Tzu fairly well explains what this is about, I think. But basically, it's very much more complicated than that, even. In a few words, it's explained like rather this. If you have a moral view on things, then you rather take the equation to when your guidelines will not fail. Meaning, basically, your guidelines shall guide, as I say, which is a bad definition, but nonetheless true, to a degree. And that this is one, in the end, appears as a guiding and light by no meaning whatsoever of any shadow-esque pictogram, just like the picture. So what is trash art? Well, if you see this picture and compare it with someone else, somewhere in the picture you should see something appear, like by your imagination, that is not of the objects that are used for the trash. Now, the decks, of course, are not trash art. That's why it is a pictogram. There's many stuff on this picture that's of not trash. Trash would be the wood, which are tools which are to be discarded, but not discarded, but discarded. And that's what I'm working on and we're working well with at the moment. So basically, trash art is that, and this is a pictogram. Fairly well explained by that, because a pictogram is what is of the essence around the chaos of the such derivation. Not the such derivation, but the such derivation. She's completely right about that one. 100%. So basically, if war doesn't interact, but doesn't even intersect on anything, but rather has its own moral guideline to which it needs to be by the ones who are in that field of war, trying to win it on their idea, be interacted with, the morality of war, the morals of war behavior to a degree, meaning non-sentence. That is much of the embodiment, but not embodiment, meaning it's powers, meaning encycles the power to its own fundament. And for that, the guideline of war is or ought to be abided to not set the rules for war end by degree of absolute. That then comes to the peace contract, meaning when war is ended, how people interact with the afterwards, and also the other constructs which are meaning to be of the moral whatever will guide further declaration of war. And that is fairly relevant because usually the peace contract does that, but it will not in case of any further declaration of such of which is not against or in or while the peace contract. Meaning the morals of war declare what morality will be to a degree for those who didn't win or fought the war by first means. Now, that is also something that goes after war. If a war is ended, the guidelines of who is the stronger one are set. You cannot harm these people anymore. They're basically like untouchables, but not the bad kind of Hindu. Which doesn't mean that these people are bad. I don't know. I literally cannot argue about that one. Doesn't mean you should touch someone. It's, for me, irrelevant too. But not each other. Meaning, war declares to a scenery that the guidelines of fighting in it value the basics. Meaning, if the basics of what is and has been moral ideal, but not ideal, meaning what will set fundament for any of sort, then war is in fact declaring that has been the truth by means of war. Now, this really sounds dumb if you're a good person, because that is an irrelevant argument. Just because you can punch someone doesn't mean you should. Yeah, great, I agree, to a degree. That doesn't mean it's true. Meaning, if I can punch you in the fucking face and no one can harm me for it because I'm the stronger one, morality becomes irrelevant to a degree. You then would and ought to be my slave if I will be really evil. And that is a bad thing, but it's nonetheless true. It's sad, but it's nonetheless true. Meaning, the peace contract after war holds the moral guidelines which by which war has been decided during war. But that's why also self-sacrifice or sacrifice of heroes or whatever you want to claim these people to be, which is irrelevant, is nonetheless just another war, and also really idiotic, because you declare that the old war are not rule for you and the old guidelines. Has this something to do with morality of war? Rather not. That is rather for the soldiers and by the soldiers for the opposite, and by the war and means for those who support the means of the war, and for them by this of the soldiers and the non-opposite for the society that is excluded from war. Means everyone who didn't fight has to just accept the state of after war. But That doesn't mean they have to be slaves to what comes after. Very much important. So if something is ought to be discussed, but not something that is set by war to moral human value or value for living life, but not living your life, then that rather is to be discussed unless you're exempted from it by status of whatever. You can always find a way and work around. Meaning, if you tell me I should give you 10,000 euros, even if I don't have 10,000 euros to spare, but you say you rather need these more than me, I can still argue with a different morality and counter you out, even if it would be just a debate. But, for example, a rational discussion is to behold like, oh, this person really does contribute this idea more to society than the other person. That's why he should be more valued by his work, not by appearance, to the degree of environment. Meaning, if of such idea that is better to vow your solely vows by yourself to an idea you could uphold to by personal or personality, then that would and should need to be sired or sira for a woman, also sire, and for that kind of to be admired. And there we come to the morality of war. Usually morality explains that would need to be admired. But as soon as a war has happened and occurred, it would need to be admired, and only in situation admired, with all further and previous consequences to also negate this admiration and whatsoever. Meaning after war the only rules count, that hopefully the old order has been established again. And that nothing new has been gained, but that doesn't need to be true. It can also set and further implement new ideas that were not developed by the war itself. That's where the peace contract doesn't kick in yet. At this point, in my mind, we're at the morale of the people who fought. And there it gets difficult. That's what I try to discuss the whole time. Because basically the morale of war is not what guides the fight. And the fight itself is not the morale of war. But what is morale of war is of such an idea or case that the guide of what is not the line to be crossed but can cross to every sort of behavior in the effort to win the fight can or could be immoral to the war or the people in the war after the idea to win the basics or the war. Sorry for this repeating of this bad word. And if that holds true, you can metaphysically prove that. And how do you metaphysically prove that? Well, that's rather difficult. Yeah, really rather difficult. Because metaphysically speaking, usually you would have the problem, not yet, but it will be apparent in a second, that usually metaphysics account that philosophy as its fundament can and needs even to be discussed at fundament, nonetheless thus the fundament is supposed or is true, or is even truth. But if such of idea that the fundament is to behold it, the fundament is evaluation by debate to the debate itself as a guide. And war declares that to have been maybe challenged. War says, well, we are the better guideline, meaning the one who started the war. That means you can turn basically everything around, and that's where the turntables kick in. Because at this point, the means of war are discussed by me right now, the peace contract is discussed, the morale of war is explained why there is a problem with it, but why it is necessary, because if in the war you need as a soldier to kill your fucking self to end the war, but not sacrifice yourself, that is permissible in the first case of war. If of such, thus, that the metaphysical idea is challenged itself by afterwards behavior to these concepts or any further that has been explained in the previous 16 minutes, something really different rather is now at work, more knowledge-wise speaking. And that is the challenge to man and woman. Meaning the challenge to archetype. And this is just one concept. And that basically says, what is war? And that is not the morale of war or the morality of war. It's rather the morality of reality by war means. And no peace contract ever in such case allowed or given. And that is total anarchy. Because at this point, everyone doubts that an eternal state of peace and serenity should even be achieved. Or any sort of forgiveness or non-forgiveness or anything of it. The only thing that should be is that the truth is that life is war, and that life in reality should also be war. At all costs, every time, any meaning whatsoever. And because people don't need to uphold to the metaphysical constructs of reality itself, they don't also need to uphold to any moral consequences, views, or degrees. Meaning at that point, the fundament of means, meaning the war of war, is basic morality of peace contract.